Today I wanted to talk about mistakes that I see young photographers and photo editors make. We all look at the internet, we look at Instagram and Facebook, and we post our pictures online. And sometimes an image jumps out not because it looks perfect or it's a beautiful scene, it's because the editing has been overdone. I'm going to give you an example today. I took one of my images. It's nothing in particular. It's just a picture of something down in Florida in Walt Disney World, but it's got some shadowy spots. It's got the sky in it. So I wanted to talk about how not to over edit. And I'm going to actually purposefully over edit this image and show you what maybe you don't want to do and maybe some ways that you can, kind of tweak your images quite a bit and still have them look natural, because to me, that's the most important thing. There's definitely a place for digital art. And that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about taking a photograph and actually trying to enhance it to get the most out of that photograph without going into Photoshop and changing skies and, doing different layers and, really getting in depth with that. That's a different thing. This is about you took an image, maybe it was a landscape image, you were somewhere and you want to just get the best out of it without overdoing it. That's the most important thing, I think, is to not overdo it, especially in the sky. The sky is one of those things we all like to crank up the saturation in pictures, and it can really give a picture an unnatural look. So for the viewer, they're looking at it and immediately it jumps out at them because it doesn't look exactly the ways that it should. So I'm going to take you into the computer here and we're going to look at this one image. Okay, it's an image of actually an attraction in Disney's Animal Kingdom, and I was on the front car of the roller coaster here. Now, as you can see, the bottom half of this image is dark, it's kind of shadowy, and the top half of the image is exposed properly for the sky. Now, this is something that you're going to want to do in your landscape images anyway. You want to expose for the brightest part of the image. If you can take an HDR to try to blend everything, where you take a few different exposures of the same spot, but I was moving, so I really wasn't able to do that here. So this is a single shot, so we're going to try to get the most out of it. Now remember, your camera gathers tons of information, and you're going to be able to manipulate this image quite a bit. So the first thing I like to do is I like to maybe bring up the exposure a little bit, but you don't want to go too much. You see how the sky's getting blown out? And if you look at my histogram up here, you can see that it's overexposing in these spots in the sky. So we don't want to go too much, but see how much it brightened the bottom half of the image? But instead of doing that, you can use a graduated filter to get the same type of effect without affecting the top of the image. So you could do something like that. Another way to affect an image is to open up the shadows and work with the highlights and the shadows. Now, if I open up the shadows here, one of the tendencies that I see is people will go way too far, and you start to see things like this. And to me, that doesn't look natural. It's a very odd look. There are supposed to be shadows in an image in some spots. I mean, the underside of the brush, you want a little bit of contrast in there. So I would say dial the shadows down a little bit. Maybe to something like that. Okay, maybe we can raise the exposure a little bit, dial down the highlights a little bit. So you want to watch your shadows and your highlights. You want to try to keep them balanced. Now, to me, this looks balanced. So let's talk about color now, because this is another place where people get a little crazy. Now, when you're working with your phone or in an Instagram app, you usually have one slider where it's saturation. And you may have a breakdown of like color tones or blues, something like that. But in an editing program like Lightroom, you have the ability to go into each color channel and adjust the hue, the saturation, and the luminance. So this is a fantastic way to really control the colors in your image and deal with them individually instead of just cranking up the saturation, which I'm going to show you here. So now if I wanted to in this image add a little saturation, I would come down here, and we have vibrance and we have saturation. Now the saturation slider is very heavy-handed. Now, I've added some saturation, but you can see the oranges got too orange, the greens are a little weird. The sky looks okay, but to me it's not like a natural looking blue. So if we reset this one and we go to vibrance, it's a little more natural looking. But I'm going to show you the way that I would recommend doing it, where you can get a really natural look, but you can enhance the colors quite a bit. And by the way, in Lightroom, if you double click on any of the sliders, it zeroes them back to where the image was taken. So that's a really helpful way to just quickly reset a slider if you go too far. Okay, so the colors here look pretty good. It's okay. Now I want to make the sky a little more, have a little more contrast in the sky. So I'm going to open the HSL panel And I have choices in here. I have the hue sliders, which affects the colors, and you can actually change them, makes green more green or green more yellow. You can actually move them around. So if I take the green slider and I go all the way to the right, you can see it makes everything look this unnatural green. If I go the other way, it makes everything look kind of dead and orangish. So each one of these sliders does affect things in a certain way. Now I'm going to add a little bit of green to this, not a lot, and I'm actually going to come down to the saturation, and I'm going to actually desaturate it a little bit. So while it's more green, it's not a heavy bright green, it's more of a muted green. Now the sky is something that I see people really go a little too far with the colors. You want your skies to look blue, but you also don't want them to look unnatural. So the way I like to edit my skies is I will come down to the luminance panel, and if you look here in the middle of the image, we have some blue sky in here. And if I take the slider and I go to the left and darken things up, you can see what you can do. You can affect just the blue in the sky. Now that looks very unnatural. You can see all sorts of like halos around all of the rocks and all of this stuff. So you don't want to do that, but you can move it a little bit just to give it a touch of darkness to it, just a little bit. And then you can come up here and maybe add a little saturation to it. Now I'm going to show you the before and after here. So that's quite a difference. And you know, this is when I like to step away for a second, go get a drink, whatever, go to the bathroom, just take a 5-second break and then come back to it. And then look at it. I'm saying it still looks a little unnatural to me. The rocks seem a little too orange. So now I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to take some color out of the orange. That looks a little more natural to me. Sometimes removing color actually will improve a picture more than adding it. And I do this a lot. And I find that the more I edit, the less color I want in the images. And I start to desaturate it a little bit and it looks more natural. It looks more like the place I was at. Now if you look here, it still looks better than the original image, but it doesn't look crazy, like I went nuts editing. Now another place where you can affect your images is with clarity, or structure, or whatever your editing program calls it. But for Lightroom, it's called clarity. And what it does is it kind of adds a little bit of a grit. It really works with the mid-tone contrasts and the blacks, and it gives it a gritty feel. And for some images, it's perfect. You want to add a lot of clarity. Some images, not so much. But you don't want to do it on the whole image sometimes. So clarity can have this effect where it halos edges and it makes things look really gritty, and you never want to use it with women's skin. So it's something you want to stay away with if you're editing a person's face. A man, sometimes you have a guy with a gritty looking face, maybe he's got a 5 o'clock shadow. A little clarity will give it like a rough, gritty look. But for a woman's face, it doesn't do anything flattering. So let's go down to the presence area of the basic panel. And in here you can have texture, which is a new slider that I really like. This almost like just sharpens everything up just a little bit. So I like to add a little bit of that to most of my images. Just a little bit, you know, just a little bit, just enough to like add that little bit of an edge to it. And so now the clarity slider. Look what happens if we go too far with this. I mean, you can get insane with this, and this looks terrible to me. Now, maybe you want an effect like this, you know, I don't know. But if you're trying to keep things looking natural, and if you go the other way, it softens everything up. So this is a slider that's very powerful and can affect your image in a lot of different ways. I don't like to use it globally. I like to use clarity inside the adjustment brush. So I'll open the adjustment brush. What I like to do with clarity is anytime there's rocks, maybe some buildings or something that's hard and gritty looking, I will paint it on individually in certain spots. And it does add a cool little effect to certain parts of an image. But you don't need it on the whole image. So now that I have my adjustment painted, and if I click on the O key, I can see where it is. You know, now I can play with it. I can go real heavy, or I can take it down to the way it was. So as you see, it makes a big difference. You can actually affect how things look throughout your image. So I think that still looks natural. I think my colors are okay. You know, so this is an image that I'd be okay with, like just the way it is. And that's how it looks compared to the original. Obviously, there's been a lot of editing done to it. But if this popped up on somebody's news feed, I don't know if it would, I'm hoping they wouldn't say, oh my God, you overdid it. So really what you want to do with your landscape images is you want to edit them, you want to get creative with them, and you have to over edit them and then pull them back to kind of see where that spot is for you, where you want to kind of have your look and the way you want your things to look. And if you're going for an unnatural look that is kind of, like a style that you're going for, then that's fine. But if you're just not sure what you're doing, you just think you got to crank up all the different sliders, that might be something you want to dial back on. Just try to, a less is more attitude with editing always. As I'm talking here, I'm just going to drop in some of my images that I've taken over the years where I had to do a lot of editing, but I tried not to go too hard with it. I affected colors, and maybe I increased the brightness in a certain part of an image, or in some of the images, I may have taken color completely out of something. Or this image here of in Walt Disney World that I took, the castle was actually purple in this image, and I actually painted out, it took me a little while, all of the color out of it and made the castle look white. But you don't know that. So that's the point. You can really get creative with your editing and really do a lot to your images, but if the viewer on the other end doesn't know it's heavily edited, I think that's a win, and that's what you're going for. So this is just a quick video with just some basic editing tips. Let me know in the comments if you like these types of videos. I mean, there's a lot to talk about with a program like Lightroom and editing, and we've been doing it for a long time, so we want to help you guys. It's not just about the cameras. We want to help you get better with your editing, because as you can see, this affects the images more than anything else. Editing your photos is really where they come alive, and you can create a look that you want, but you want to just try to keep it simple. Don't go crazy with your shadows and your highlights. You want everything to look balanced, but you want it to look real. It's okay to leave some dark spots in your images. It's okay for, sometimes to have some bright spots in an image. If the sun is in an image, you don't want to try to balance it out perfectly. Sometimes there is a bright spot in an image, so don't drop the highlights all the way. And the colors, just try to affect them minimally. Tweak them to your liking, but also try to tweak them in a way that is natural looking. Okay, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.